Hello, and welcome back to David Starkey Talks. This talk is really something of a footnote, though a pretty big one, to my last, which was given the rather sensational title, Starmer Will End Democracy. Maybe some of you thought it was exaggerated. Maybe you were especially concerned about the section in which I talked about I don't want to use the word police state, but it is very tempting. Starmer goes on about his role as chief prosecutor. He exaggerates his part in advising the police service before that in Northern Ireland. And of course, he's chosen as his principal advisor Sue Gray. Again, was the enforcer within the Cabinet Office, the head of this bizarre neo-Stasi, this new office of censorship of the whole political class and perhaps the nation, called wonderfully, that wonderful, redolent, puritanical title, Propriety and Ethics, not Essex, Ethics, let's get that one right. And incidentally, strongly rumoured at one stage in her career to have functioned as a police spy on the border between Ireland and the Republic under the cover of playing a landlady. Who knows? One couldn't possibly say. But today, there's just been a quite remarkable confirmation of this. The Sunday Times has reported an idea of adding another member to this trinity of Starmer and Sue Gray. Somebody whose name, those of you who follow politics, might actually sort of have a little bit of an echo at the back of your mind. Ollie Robbins, Sir Oliver Robbins, KCMG, Knight Commander of the Most Noble Order of the Michael and the George. Since Michael and George. You'll remember him, if you remember him at all, as Theresa May. Remember her at all as Theresa May's principal advisor on Brexit and the principal negotiator with the European Union, where he was rings were run round him, or perhaps they weren't. Perhaps it was strongly rumoured he was deeply anti-Brexit, as indeed is most of his class, and the apparent selling of Britain down the river wasn't the result of the brilliance of Barnier, the French negotiator on behalf of the European Union, but a kind of mutual complicity. Anyway, all of that vanished, of course, when Boris came in and Ollie Robbins disappeared. And by the way, the other thing that was very strongly notable about Robbins during this period, again, it fitted, in this case, very, very well, perhaps indeed in the fact that he was fundamentally anti-Brexit. It fitted very well with the position of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, you will remember, was hopeless at any form of public communication, almost indeed, not quite, but almost as bad as Starmer, and similarly rigid and puritanical. You know, there are two types of Prime Minister, it said. One is a bishop and the other is a bookie. Well, of course, nowadays you can have female bishops. They used to be called episcopissa, which I think is a rather wonderful phrase in the days of the early church, where there were one or two, or indeed it was sometimes the title given to the wife of the bishop. Those days before the strict enforcement of celibacy. Anyway, I think Theresa May would have made a very good bishop. Indeed, she may well become one in this new age of post prime ministerial careers. Episcopissa Theresa, I think, sounds rather wonderful. But of course, Starmer too is another one of these bishops, very strikingly, against Boris's bookie and so on. But Robbins, as you would expect, serving a prime minister that is rigid and moralistic and defensive, was fond of secrets. Theresa May was fond of secrets. There was this impenetrable fortress of the Number 10 operation in which Robbins was a central figure. He was its bridgehead towards a similar fortress operation with the negotiations with Europe. This preference for secrecy, clearly it's a personal preference of both May and Robbins, but in terms of Robbins, it is written absolutely like a thread. It runs absolutely absolutely like a thread throughout the whole of this man's very distinguished career in the civil service. Can we rename it the public service, as Sir Keir, himself a distinguished or would-be distinguished representative of the public service, calls it. Very typically, after PP at Oxford, Robbins joined the Treasury, where he flourished. He quickly rose within its ranks and figured very interestingly in a particular division which is responsible for the financing of intelligence and the Secret Service. And then he shifts direction, rising rapidly all the time, and he becomes principal private secretary, first in the dying days of Tony Blair as Prime Minister, and then to his successor and political murderer, I suppose, use a kind of word, political assassin, Gordon Brown. Quite quickly, however, it doesn't last very long with Brown. Instead, he finds his natural métier. In 2007 and thereafter, for the next 7 years, he is the principal intelligence officer within government. He rejoices in, let's get this right, the title of Director of Intelligence, Security, and latterly Resilience. All that means. And interestingly enough, after the fall of the Brown government in 2010, he continues in this role at number 10 with an enhanced standing with David Cameron. Like so much else of that new Labour government, as I've argued, it rolls over seamlessly into the coalition and beyond. Anyway, here he remains, the heart, not simply of intelligence, but the interface of intelligence and the Prime Minister, that axial role in number 10 itself. And he survives there until 2014, at which point he goes to the Home Office and he becomes second permanent secretary there. And I wonder what bit he's in charge of. Well, you've guessed, the security bit, especially border force, where he has, in which role he has a very memorable encounter with the Commons Home Affairs Select Committee, and he's sent out like a naughty boy because he hadn't produced the accounts, which interestingly, I gather, he never did produce. Anyway, he rises from there to become, as we've just discovered, Theresa May's very secretive, very confidential, very on-side Brexit negotiator. After Boris, out he goes. And where does he go? Well, he goes back as Sir Jeremy Haywood Fellow to the Blatavnik Institute of Government at Oxford, and then, inevitably, he joins Goldman Sachs. They, like Jeremy Haywood, in his case at Morgan Stanley, they all have to make that honest penny as the few $100,000 they get in a year and enhanced pensions and retiring at 60, and the other fruits of selfless, and the honours and the knighthoods, the other selfless fruits, the fruits of, let's get this right, the fruits of selfless public service. He benefits from these, disgraceful tastings of the private sector at Goldman Sachs, as I said, as Jeremy Haywood had done in his stretch at Morgan Stanley. And then, more interestingly, what does he do? He joins a consultancy in Mayfair. Well, nothing surprising about that, is there? But it's a rather odd consultancy. It's got a name that most people couldn't possibly pronounce. Hacluyt. Now, I can pronounce. It's called Hacluyt. Hacluyt was an Elizabethan explorer, sailor, whatever, who wrote about the navigations of England, that remarkable expansion of England in the 16th century. This Hacluyt society, this Hacluyt, is concerned with something very different. It's the expansion of the security state. Let me quote from the Sunday Times report. Mayfair consultancy Hacluyt, founded by a group of former N16 spies. Founded by a former group of M16 spies. Here is this man who has been at the heart of government, specialising in border control, specialising in what is that again, intelligence, security and resilience, joins a commercial operation put together by a group of former M16 spies. And that is the background of the man who is going to join this trinity of policeman Starmer, policewoman Sue Gray, and secret policeman Ollie Robbins. Sounds like Putin's Russia, doesn't it? After all, this man's background, this astonishingly distinguished career in the intelligence services, is exactly like that of Putin himself, who was one of those intelligent members of the Russian apparatchiks, the Russian nomenclatura in the intelligence, the KGB, in both internal and external intelligence. You know, that is not the only resemblance to Russia. Let's talk about this a little bit more. There's a very remarkable article by Neil Ferguson, published recently, in which he talks about the Sovietization of America. Actually, with the senescence, look, we always used to refer to the leaders of Soviet Russia as these extraordinary waxworks, or indeed of communist China, the Brezhnevs and all the rest of it. Of course, America is now led by somebody even more conspicuously decayed in the form of the walking corpse of Joe Biden, barely able to speak, barely able to stand up straight, and certainly not able to answer a question, partly his wife, or step off a platform without assistance. But the resemblance is a much stronger one, Ferguson argues. Ferguson points to the decay of the American military, this once vast, all-powerful machine like the Soviet Army, which played the absolutely crucial part in the defeat of Nazi Germany, so the decaying of the military apparatus, and the omnipresent governmental apparatus, which is both omnipresent, vastly expensive, and peculiarly inefficient. At the same time, there is a ruling dominant political party in America, the Democrat Party, with this senescent leader, which is pushing an ideology like communism in Russia that nobody actually believes in. The Democrat Party is the party of woke and the public service. That's America. Doesn't it sound astonishingly like Britain, and especially Starmer's Britain? Unfortunately, of course, Starmer may not be very bright. I've argued that already with his 2 Bs and a C as a fee-paying pupil, as a scholarship pupil, not a fee-paying pupil, as a scholarship pupil at a fee-paying school. Not very bright, but plodding and determined. Unfortunately, the exact qualities very often of a spy. And the resemblance, I think, is even stronger in terms of the whole of British government. I've described that extraordinary decaying tentacle-like network of quangos of the civil service, of lawyers wrapping themselves around the British body politic like those chains and bonds that were applied to Gulliver by the people of Lilliput to tie him down. Very, very similar to that. And of course, the Labour Party, as we will discover, as reading its manifesto, which I've just done, makes all too clear, the Labour Party is wholly committed to the intensification of the woke agenda, of the agenda on race, which really is an inverse, as Kemi Badenoch has had the courage to point out, is the inverse of apartheid. It is a new form of apartheid. Its belief in the fact that transsexualism is real and must be enforced. All of these preposterous beliefs, which are called woke, or the ideology of critical race theory, or whatever else you want to name it. All of these will be at the centre of the new Labour mission, and nobody, or only a tiny number, actually believe in them. There's a very interesting report again, I think. Is it the Sunday Times or is it in the Sunday Telegraph, which has surveyed members of the Labour Party to ask them, do they share the conversion of Sir Keir himself, who you remember was terribly hesitant on whether or not all women had penises, and until recently declared, well, he sort of underwent a progressive confirmation that, well, 99% did, and now he's decided that all women, or rather, that 99% of women didn't. Let me get this right. The confusion is infectious. 99% of women did not have a penis, and latterly he's undergone a complete conversion that no, women do not have a penis. This astonishing recognition of biology, maybe even the correct number and nature of female chromosomes, is even penetrated the Labour Party. Apparently, 75% of Labour Party members also believe that women do not have a penis. I know it leaves 25, but there we are. It's a small majority of a tiny minority if you actually look at the whole population. So a government that's going to enforce a widely disrespected and disbelieved and unreal, fundamentally unreal policy in woke. But of course, it's going to enforce fundamental unreality in everything. Everybody has pointed out that its calculations on the move to net zero by 2030 are completely impossible. They are simply absurd. And major businessmen who've actually backed Labour say this, people who know about these things with deep experience. The idea that there will suddenly be this miracle of economic growth is once again profoundly untrue. It will not happen. The various structures that Labour has created make it quite clear. Similarly, this notion that suddenly the logjam of planning is to be unblocked. And by the way, who created the entire network of our planning laws? It is the Labour government of 1945 who creates the Green Belt. Again, that Labour government. All of this dense network, which stands, as all bureaucracies do, in the way of change and in the way increasingly of reality. That is the creation of Labour. Old Labour, new Labour, changed Labour. So if you have, as in the Soviet Union, a system which is decaying militarily, decaying politically, decaying bureaucratically, and which people increasingly see through, they know it's not true. They may profess assent in public, but privately, and in private conversations, if we're still allowed to have them, they know it's not true. How do you enforce it? You need the police, the public police, the political police, and the secret police. And it seems to me, if you look at that deadly trio of Starmer, Sue Gray, and Ollie Robbins, that is the new, very English KGB. Enjoy your freedom while you can. And maybe remember that in the ballot.